is a site determination here as far as the practical is concerned. If you are asked to identify this organ and you write kidney, this is not enough. It should be right or left kidney, okay? You have to mention the side of the organ for which side. We call this mentioning the side as to lateralize. All the organs which are double in your body, you must tell them this is for the right side of the body or the left side of the body. Okay, there is a little bit difference for all, you have to identify them. Then, as I mentioned in the lecture also, that you have inferior vena cava and the abdominal aorta. Okay, we know that the veins from the lower limb, iliac veins, they are coming and they join to form the inferior vena cava. And if you remember, this inferior vena cava was going behind the liver to enter the right atrium of the heart. Inferior vena cava and superior vena cava were two structures opening in the heart, right atrium, if you remember. So this is inferior vena cava. And the other thing, the largest vessel that is supplying the whole body is aorta. Aorta coming from the heart supplies the, gives branches to head and neck region, then it goes to the thorax, then it goes to the abdomen. So this is the part of the aorta in the abdomen, abdominal aorta. And it finish here before the pelvis begin into again iliac arteries, okay? Even if you don't know this, but I want to tell you, because without this explanation you will not have a concept what is there, okay? So the iliac, this bone which is the pelvic cavity, you have these bones here. These bones are called as iliac bones, okay? These bones in the pelvis, they are called as iliac bones. You can have a look here also. Iliac bones. Up till now, we have done the pelvis, two parts of the pelvis as hip bone. Remember, hip bone on the right side, hip bone on the left side, and a sacrum together they make pelvis. This hip bone has 1, 2, 3 bones joining together to form one hip bone. This part of the hip bone is called as iliac bone, ilium. Okay, iliac bone. So everything in this region is called related to ilium. Iliac fossa, iliac vessels, iliac lymph nodes, iliac artery, iliac vein, okay? Everything in this region is named after this bone, okay? So we have iliac bones. The abdominal aorta, which is coming from here, when it branch out, we call it as iliac artery, okay? These are certain landmarks that you have to know. Then this bone in front is the pubic bone. If you remember, there was a joint in secondary cartilaginous joint. We have intervertebral disc and symphysis pubis. Pubis is the word for this pubic bone. This is also part of hip bone, but the front part. This one is the upper part of the hip bone, ilium. The front part of the hip bone is pubis. So this pubic bone also you need to identify. Here we have the pubic bone. Okay, and the symphysis pubis is the secondary joint which is between. If you identify inferior vena cava, aorta, pubic bones, or not, if you are not able to say pubic, pelvic bones, so you are able to identify now the model. In this model, if I keep this in exam marking this side, you should make sure that the inferior vena cava will be towards the right side. Why? Because it enters into the right atrium of the heart, right side. Then the left one will be for you. The right one will be inferior vena cava and the left one will be aorta. Okay? I cannot keep it like this to make this one right and make this one left. Okay, this is wrong position. It should be always right and left. Okay? And this pubic bone should always be in front. In front. I cannot keep the bladder in front of the pubic bone. Okay? It's not like this that the pubic bone is behind and the bladder is in front. Okay? Bladder is always inside the pelvis. See? Bladder is here, inside the pelvis. So the pubic bone is in front. In this model also you can identify the similar structure. Pubic bone and bladder is behind it. The pubic bone and bladder is behind it. Pubic bone and bladder. So the front is pubic bone. If you know that to the front is pubic bone, you will automatically keep the bladder behind. And now it's easy for you to say this is right and this is left. Okay? 1 mark for one practical question. But if you make it wrong, then it's you lose the mark. Similarly, the ureter you will identify by the same landmarks. Left ureter, right ureter. Okay? The right pelvis, the left pelvis. Right renal vein, left renal vein. Right renal artery, left renal artery. Here you can see, okay? And right suprarenal gland, left suprarenal gland. Okay?
From vein, near to vein, right?
Yeah. Okay? And after this, we see the different parts of the kidney and the bladder, and we will study that. The kidney, if you see, it is bean shaped, as I told you, convex, laterally, concave, medially. This point where the structures are entering, we call it as hilum of the kidney. Okay? Hilum is that point where the artery enters the vein, pelvis, that makes the ureter, and lymphatics, they come out. But the artery is going in. Okay? Then, if we cut the coronal section, coronal is this, when you cut from front to back, you can identify the kidney inner structure. Outer lining is cortex. Morning we have done this. And then the inner are the medulla and having its pyramids. The pyramids ending into the calyces, minor and major calyx, which join to form the renal pelvis. This renal pelvis, which is a funnel shape from the back, you can see it. Funnel shape dilatation of the ureter, it then becomes ureter below. The ureter has 3 parts, abdominal part, but once it crosses the iliac vessel, it enters into pelvis, and once it enters into the bladder, it becomes the intramural part. Okay, so 1, 2, and 3 parts of the ureter. Abdominal part, pelvic part, intramural part, okay, which is inside the wall of the bladder. 3 parts of the ureter. Then this ureter, when this pelvis is dilated portion, see this is more dilated like a funnel. But when it becomes ureter, it is constricted, narrow. This is the first point of constriction or narrowing where obstruction of a stone can occur. Then the second point of constriction is when the ureter is crossing the iliac vessel, it can compress. Okay? And when the ureter is entering the bladder, also at that point, there may be constriction. Now, if you have a look at this point where the ureter is entering the bladder and the urethra is coming out, here another ureter is coming, there is a triangular smooth area. We call it as trigone. The boundary of this triangular area has three structures: right ureter, left ureter, and urethra. Okay? The rest of the bladder inside is having folds, not smooth like this area. These folds that it can increase in size to accommodate the urine. Then another thing that you should know, the bladder has apex to the front, base behind, neck below. This is the fundus and the body. Below the neck you can see this gland, which is called as prostate gland. So by this now you identify this is a male pelvis, okay? And behind the bladder, these two glands that you see are seminal vesicles. These white color are the ductus deferens coming to the seminal vesicles, okay? So this is how you will identify the structures in this model. Arrangement of structure at the hilum is first is vein, then artery, and then the renal pelvis or ureter. Okay? So this is how the structures from front to back are arranged. If we see these two different types of pelvis, the male and the female pelvis, in the male pelvis behind is rectum, in front is the bladder. Okay? And then more anterior is the pubic bone. So the bladder has still the apex towards the pubic bone, the base behind, and below the bladder you can identify this gland which is called as prostate gland. Okay, below the neck of the bladder. We can see the ureters entering obliquely into the bladder from both sides. If I open it again, you will find the same trigone, triangular area. Okay, with the urethra going down into the prostate and the two ureters opening. Okay, the further details for bladder we are not going to do. Which type of muscle is there, what is supplied and things. We are not doing that. But just you should know the parts of the bladder. There is apex, there is base, there is neck, a body or a fundus. And there are two ureters, right ureter, left ureter, and one urethra which is opening into the bladder. The rough part is the folds and the smooth part which is triangular in the bladder is the trigone. Okay. Then this is all about the male pelvis. You will identify by the presence of the prostate gland and the seminal vesicle glands. While in the female pelvis, now this is just half of it, okay? So the section is sagittal section. Sagittal, cutting into right and left half. In the sagittal section, if you identify the rectum, then in front of the rectum, like in the male, there is no bladder in front. Instead, the bladder is separated from the rectum by the presence of the uterus. Uterus is present between the bladder and the rectum. The bladder is compressed because the uterus is always in a curved position. And the bladder has no prostate gland below it. The urethra directly open to the exterior. We have the same apex and the body and the base of the bladder. Every structure is same except that there is no prostate below it, and secondly, there are no seminal vesicles behind. Okay, because both of them are the male glands. This is all regarding the difference in the male pelvis or the female pelvis, which we will take in more detail in the reproductive system also. But for the urinary system, this is what you need to know.
Okay. Done?
Any question?
No, thank you.
Thank you.